is A Walk in the Garden. Do you know who this guy is? There's probably no real reason why you would have to, but this is Jean-Paul Sartre. I am a monolinguistic Aussie, and so my capacity to say that name as a Frenchman would say it is fairly limited. But Sartre was indeed French. In fact, he was a philosopher. He has gotten a reputation, or he has had a reputation of being something of a negative person. At least that's the way people describe him. He said things like, life is nothing but an empty bubble floating on a sea of nothingness. So you can see why people might assume that. He also made comments like, there's no difference whether you are a king or a pauper. But perhaps the clarity of what he was actually trying to say comes through in a quote where he said, man is nothing but what he makes of himself. Of course, he lived before the time of gender sensitivity, and when he said man, he obviously meant mankind, or humanity would be the best way to say that today. Sartre comes from the school of philosophical thought known as existentialism. He is the first to self-proclaim as an existentialist, but the ideas go back probably as far as Søren Kierkegaard. The primary philosophical position had been throughout most of history that everything has an essence, and that essence defines its nature, it defines its reality, it defines its value, it defines its purpose, it defines its meaning, and then existence conforms to the essence. Existentialists suggest that existence precedes essence, and in fact that was one of the things that Sartre said very clearly. You can hear those dogs going crazy in the background, so I think I'm going to move to a different spot in the garden. The idea then that existence precedes essence is actually a really important one from the existentialist perspective, because what it is saying is that I am making myself me, that I'm the one that creates all that I am. So those other statements about life being meaningless was that Sartre made was about him trying to represent this idea that the objective perspective on the value of my life is irrelevant. So this leads to a concept known as existential angst. You may have heard of this existential angst. Existential angst is that ever-growing feeling that my life is at discord with the world around me, and that things outside of me that I was hoping would give me meaning, career, family, other relationships, perhaps studies, that those things are failing to adequately provide for me a sense of meaning, a sense of who I am, and that they're at odds. And the existentialists would call that environment out there as the absurd. It's the place of the absurd. It doesn't communicate for us meaning. So this brings us to an existential crisis, and the existential crisis is that realization that the world isn't providing for me a sense of meaning. The conclusion that very often happens around an existential crisis is that I have no meaning, I have no worth. Well, that's not what the existentialist is trying to say. The existentialist is trying to say that the meaning comes from the way that we relate to the world around us. That's actually what's happening in the garden. There's actually a crisis of existence, a crisis of meaning. The thought amongst the first couple is, does my meaning come from the one that is defining me by love and embrace and walking with me, or does it come from me reaching towards the highest goals that I can imagine? And the sense of worth seemed to be attached to the latter, and so there was this rejection of the former, which sets up the classic long arc of the biblical narrative. So for Sartre, Sartre, the idea of God is in the absurd. God cannot exist because the only constructs of God are a construct of being all powerful, all knowing, and therefore predicting who I am. If God is all powerful and if God is all knowing, then God must be in control of everything and therefore has already defined everything about me. And so the reality of my life, the meaning of my life, is totally in Him, not in me. So therefore, I cannot have freedom. And so that's where Sartre rejects the idea of God. For many people, the idea of the meaning of life comes from somewhere else. Douglas Adams, in the Hitchhiker's Guide for the Galaxy, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, says that the answer to the question of life, the universe, and everything is 42. And so that 42 has become something of a popular meme in recent days. He says, though, the problem isn't the answer, the problem is the question. What question are you asking? And that actually has little reflections of this very, very same process, this existential analysis of reality. For others, the search for meaning is going to go in the exact opposite direction. Some will say the universe is calling me to my purpose, and it keeps dropping clues in the way for me, and so I have to be attentive to what the universe will be saying to me if my desire is to know my place in it. Of course, that's not significantly different from the idea of God. And if God has a plan and He's all powerful and all knowing and a little bit disconnected from me, that's not a huge difference from that idea of the universe. But all of those things are somewhat unsatisfactory, aren't they? Sartre does say something else that is revealing and interesting, at least from my perspective. He says something like the fact that there is no God is certain, but my heart cries out for God all day long. There is still this sense, this desire for something more. The existentialist observation that looking for meaning out there in the things around me is a futile process, and we're all very aware of that. But I want to say this as we walk through this garden about that. It's my sense, it's my understanding, it's my awareness as I've journeyed through the garden that the search for meaning is in fact a search for worth. Those two ideas go hand in hand all the time, don't they? If my life has meaning, then clearly it has worth. If it has no meaning, then I am worthless. And as I said last time, the search for meaning is a search for love. Search for worth is a search for love. Love and worth are two sides of the same coin. So a search for meaning is a search for worth. And when Sartre says, my heart cries out for God, he is saying that I long for love. I long to be loved. And I have become convinced that that love will be found in the place where I find my worth, and that's what the first couple are saying, that they're not certain that the relationship they have is going to adequately meet their need for a sense of worth, because they long to be in that place where their worth cannot be challenged. At least that's the way I read it. So in this walk in the garden, my faith becomes quite important to me as helping me process this. I agree with Sartre. The idea of an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present, everywhere God does take away from the idea of personal freedom and a personal discovery process. But what if God wasn't like that? What if God is love, as is communicated in the Bible? What if love is the communication of worth? and what if worth is the communication of meaning. So when God loves me, he embraces me, he imparts to me a sense of worth, and he imparts to me the meaning of my life. The meaning of my life is not found then in what I will do. The meaning of my life is found in the embrace of love, the journey of love, and in that journey, in that embrace, there will be many times at which what I do will, or at least needs to be, defined by love. So this walk in the garden is the realization, this recognition of that process in our life, and it applies in all sorts of places, in all sorts of contexts, and all sorts of realities. I think most people that end up watching these videos will have faith. And so they'll be at that starting point. I suspect that from time to time, people will watch these that don't have any faith at all. I don't want the mention of faith to dissuade you from continuing. This will not be an argument for faith. This is a genuine journey and attempt at which faith speaks into it. But if you'll journey with me, walk in the garden, seek to rediscover that place of love and relationship, then the extent to which faith makes sense in that process ought to be self-evident. So the invitation continues. Come walking in the garden. Let's find let's see if we can discover our meaning, the meaning of our lives in this walk and in the relationships that it leads to. Talk to you next time.